Hello, this is the Rep. We're gonna do Matthew Part Two, the sequel. This is in order to cover some stuff that we didn't cover in Matthew Part Two. It's not really a new message. It's basically going over some stuff that we missed, or that I missed more appropriately. This is the thing when we're going through Matthew. Matthew is addressed to Jewish people, and he assumes knowledge of the Hebrew Scriptures. He assumes knowledge of Hebrew culture. That's why when he talked about the betrothal of Mary and Joseph, he doesn't go into detail because he assumes that the people he's talking to know these things. Well, he does this as well with the prophets, but Matthew, more than all the other gospels, really brings up the prophets over and over again. And he does so to basically show that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophets. Now, what's important for us to get to here, and this might be a little bit controversial, is the fact that Matthew doesn't actually follow the proper hermeneutics of the evangelical or fundamental community when he quotes these prophets. His translation of what they were saying is different than what the Hebrew people of their day would have expected. But let's get into this a little bit. This is important for the rest of our study. So hopefully we can cover something here that might at least make you wrestle with God a little bit. Um, Matthew says that the prophet tells us that the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel. Okay, now we have to look at three different things here. The first is that uh, Matthew says that the prophet says a virgin shall be with child. Now, as we know, that's a highly unusual situation. But what becomes difficult is when you look at the actual Hebrew word uh, for virgin, that we translate virgin. It's actually the word alma, which means a woman's age. It's talking about a young woman. It doesn't talk about her sexual history. It's not the word virgin, it's the word a young woman. Now, I would suggest that maybe there's some similarities there for this reason. In that culture, a woman was either married or she was not married, and in well, that's obvious. Sorry, but if she was not a virgin before she was married, then she was called a whore. Um, So you wouldn't describe a woman that was a young woman, you wouldn't describe her as a young woman who got pregnant unless she was married, in which case you would describe her as a married woman. Um, so I don't think that this is as clear cut, and I think that bears itself out because the Septuagint version, pardon me for that, but the Septuagint version of the Hebrew Scriptures, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, which was what Jesus is quoting from, which is what Matthew quotes from, which is what most of the people in the Jewish community would have used, because most of them didn't speak Hebrew at this time. The Septuagint version actually translates the word but into betula, which is the word that means a virgin, an actual virgin. Now, that would be maybe a bit controversial if Christians translated it, but they didn't. The Septuagint was translated by Hebrew scholars. The Hebrew scholars looked at the word alma and said it means virgin, and they translated it into the Greek word virgin. Um, so we have a little bit of a disparity. And so when Matthew says the virgin shall be with child, it becomes this question of, okay, what's the word? Now, now we get into gets a little bit more complex. Isaiah's prophecy comes in the time of the king Ahaz. Now, Ahaz is facing the Syrian invasion. He's told to trust in God, and the sign of his trusting in God is that a young woman will bear a child, and the child's name will be God with us. Now, what most Hebrew scholars believe is that Isaiah was actually telling Ahaz about the birth of Hezekiah, who would continue on the Davidic line. And because of that continuing on of the Davidic line, that would suggest that God was still with the Israeli people. Um, and when that happens, rather than take that as a sign of God taking care of the people, Hezekiah or Ahaz still doesn't trust in God, and the Syrian people wind up wiping out Israel or Judea because of his refusal to trust in God. So we wind up with this passage that at the time meant something, but Matthew recontextualizes it. Matthew says, no, it actually means this. Now, the idea of proper hermeneutics says context, context, context. We're supposed to translate that scripture in its historical context, but Matthew actually translates it out of its historical context, which leads us to one of two issues, one of two beliefs. Either Matthew had no idea what he was doing,